The White House has increased scrutiny on Somali communities, particularly in Minnesota, following a fraud scandal that involved some people of Somali descent.
4:11 a.m. The Trump administration is taking action against thousands linked to a massive fraud scandal in Minnesota. A judge used her power to cover up a city-funded embezzlement operation. $18 billion vanished, stolen outside federal oversight and quietly diverted. Fentanyl, packaged as dozens of blue pills, was smuggled into the United States. Want to know the whole truth? Hit like and I'll show you everything.
But equally importantly, we're cracking down on more than $19 billion in fraud that was stolen by Somalian bandits. Can you believe that Somalia, they turned out to be higher IQ than we thought?
4:11 a.m., Minneapolis, Minnesota. The city was drowning in the brutal winter cold. The temperature had dropped to minus 25 degrees Celsius, turning sidewalks into sheets of glass and alleyways into wind tunnels. In Cedar Riverside, known to locals as Little Mogadishu, every high-rise stood silent, dim lights glowing behind frost-covered windows, as if the entire neighborhood was holding its breath. No one suspected that the largest public aid fraud takedown in U.S. history was about to begin. No sirens, no warnings, only the low growl of unmarked engines moving through the snow. On the edge of downtown, 12 federal vehicles slid into position around a government building tied to court operations and public assistance paperwork. Within seconds, the surrounding area was locked down. A federal task force, 59 agents from the FBI, ICE, and the Office of Inspector General of the Department of Health and Human Services, stepped out wearing winter gear and body armor, carrying sealed search warrants and evidence bags. These were not ordinary investigators. This was a federal strike team built for one purpose: to expose a system that had been bleeding American taxpayers for years. At 4:18 a.m., the first team gathered at the main entrance. Then the order was delivered: quiet, controlled, and final. Open the door. A steel ram slammed into the frame. Once, twice. The door collapsed inward. Alarms erupted. Lights flashed. Boots thundered across the polished floor. Security personnel rushed into the hallways with flashlights cutting through the darkness, locking down offices, securing computers, and blocking access to the building's internal network. Inside the first secured office, agents found stacks of folders labeled Emergency Relief, Refugee Assistance, and Senior Support. This investigation, ignited by public outrage over alleged Medicaid fraud, had already uncovered a vast network leading to a shocking turning point. A Somali state judge, Msu Mahira Suleiman, was the alleged mastermind behind the scheme. To the public, Judge Kadra Yusuf Noor was a rising star. In early 2022, she was celebrated as a historic figure, someone who had broken barriers inside the state's justice system. She was seen as the face of a new Minnesota, but according to a sealed federal indictment, that same judge is accused of being the central figure coordinating the flow of money. As agents tightened the perimeter, the criminal structure began to surface. Medicaid fraud draining millions, suspected of fueling drug and human trafficking networks under the cover of aid programs. A community that once trusted promises of support now faced a chain of revelations, one after another. On paper, it looked like compassion. But according to federal investigators, those folders were only a disguise for something far darker. An embezzlement scheme so massive they estimate it could reach $18 billion. Money meant for crisis relief, for struggling families, for communities in distress, for seniors living on fixed incomes, people who cannot endure another tax hike, another program cut, another promise broken. And when the building fell silent again, this time under federal control, one unavoidable truth remained. If government paperwork could be used to steal $18 billion, then this theft was not happening on the streets. It was happening inside the system, behind desks, behind stamps, behind official signatures. And before the sun rose, Minneapolis would learn a name no one expected. A name not tied to the underworld, but tied to the courthouse. Hit like and subscribe to follow how this fraud could vanish so mysteriously, right in front of federal agents.
Millions of dollars going to Minnesota through Governor Walz perhaps was being used to fund massive fraud.
The agents conducted a systematic room-by-room search, flashlights cutting through every corner of the darkened space. On the reception counter lay carefully polished brochures promoting refugee assistance programs, items arranged to project legitimacy. But the truth was buried behind that clean surface. Behind a false wall in the conference area, smashed open with a hammer, the agents uncovered a hidden money counting room. On a mahogany conference table normally used for official meetings and press statements, sat 6 industrial cash-counting machines. Beside them were stacks of money sealed in shrink wrap, piled thick like bricks. And on the wall, where a regional map should have been, was a complex schematic linking 27 non-profit organizations to a single offshore account in Djibouti. For months, President Donald Trump had repeatedly warned that billions of dollars are being drained through fraud operations. Major media outlets insisted his claim of an $18 billion welfare scandal was exaggerated. But inside that room, federal agents confronted a reality far worse. The moment they located the judge's private safe, they understood one thing immediately. The president had not exaggerated. If anything, he had downplayed it. When the forensic team finally breached the safe, investigators recovered the central ledger. The ledger exposed a fraud enterprise, massive, automated, and relentless, so aggressive it had siphoned nearly 20% of Minnesota's total welfare budget in just 3 years. To understand how $18 billion could be stolen, you have to understand the structure behind it. This operation was built on 3 pillars: ghost patients, fake clinics, and political protection. The first pillar, fake clinics. Only hours after the judge's office was secured, another team raided the Somali Community Health Care Center in South Minneapolis. Records showed the clinic billed Medicaid for roughly 5,000 patient visits per week. The clinic claimed it provided culturally specialized trauma counseling and autism treatment for refugee children. But when investigators stepped inside, they found a room almost completely empty. 3 folding chairs and a small dust-covered table. No doctors, no nurses, no patients. It wasn't a medical facility. It was a production line for fraud. Judge Noor's network obtained forged identities of 78,000 immigrants through black market sources. Every night, back-end servers automatically generated fraudulent claims at scale. Patient A treated, $500. Patient B housing assistance, $1,200. At least 4,200 fabricated accounts remained active, draining $80 million from Minnesota in only 2 years. Algorithms flooded Minnesota's welfare systems by exploiting weak verification, especially in communities where nearly 90% of Somali households depended on benefit assistance. The second pillar, political protection. Judge Noor operated in a Somali majority district, and she herself was born in Somalia. That identity became a shield. Whenever auditors questioned unexplained asset growth or empty clinics, Noor and her allies responded with the same script. They claimed investigators were targeting refugees and launching a political witch hunt. Seized documents revealed the bribery model in detail. $52,000 consulting fees paid to regulators to ignore every warning sign. The refugee narrative was used as cover, an excuse to silence scrutiny. A whistleblower later exposed the growth pattern as coded fraud, registrations surging 400% without a single on-site inspection. And behind that manufactured silence, billions of dollars disappeared. Then, inside the safe, beneath the ledger, agents found the darkest evidence of all. Not cash, not documents, but 3 transparent plastic bags filled with blue pills, fentanyl. Nearly 10 kilograms, highly addictive. And in that moment, the case stopped being just about stolen money. It was about financing conflict. Fraud was the engine, but the real fuel was something far more dangerous. If you believe U.S. federal agencies can dismantle this massive criminal network, comment "stopped" to give strength to justice. At 5:17 a.m., a second federal strike team pushed into a massive warehouse inside Burnsville's industrial zone, near the area where she was born. On paper, the site was listed as a food distribution center for a non-profit network. It was supposedly storing rice and flour for families in need. But the moment DEA and ICE special response units breached the loading docks, they stopped cold. A chemical stench slammed into them so sharp it burned their eyes. This wasn't the smell of grain. It was the smell of narcotics. Inside, they found the real output of the $18 billion fraud machine. Hidden inside humanitarian basmati rice sacks were thousands of vacuum-sealed fentanyl bricks. Some were stamped with the CJNG Scorpion logo. The operation was circular and terrifyingly efficient. Judge Noor's network had siphoned billions in U.S. taxpayer money through Medicaid fraud. That money was laundered through shell companies in Dubai and Nairobi. It was then used to purchase high-purity fentanyl from cartel suppliers in Mexico. The cartel shipped it back into Minnesota, concealed inside the judge's so-called relief trucks, cargo that looked like aid, but functioned like a weapon. At a locked workstation inside the warehouse, agents recovered 5 secured tablets showing encrypted route instructions tracking overseas transfers. Minneapolis linked directly to Nairobi, Dubai, and Mexico City. An invisible pipeline where relief funds disappeared offshore, then resurfaced as laundered political financing. President Trump had warned at his rallies, saying, "This is an invasion funded by your tax dollars." Standing in that warehouse, the agents realized something chilling. It wasn't rhetoric, it was a blueprint. But the human cost was worse than the drugs. Behind storage racks, sealed behind a reinforced door, agents forced entry into a hardened basement compartment, built to stay hidden. And there, in a cramped, poorly ventilated room, they found 45 Somali individuals. They were not workers, they were hostages. These men and women had been trafficked into the United States under the cover of refugee resettlement, processed through nonprofit organizations tied to Noor's funding program. After arrival, their passports were seized. They were told they owed $50,000 in travel fees. To repay the debt, they were forced into a drug packaging line, handling toxic precursors without gloves, masks, or protection. If they resisted, they were threatened with the execution of their families back in Somalia. Then agents recovered a file from the office that froze the entire room. A list of 1,800 Somali individuals trafficked illegally, moved through hotels owned by a political donor, registered into welfare programs as aid recipients, and then erased, disappearing into drug distribution crews. This empire didn't just steal money, it weaponized compassion. It used real statistics about welfare dependence as camouflage, then buried terror underneath it. A state judge, sworn to uphold the law, was now accused of operating an industrial-scale forced labor trafficking compound financed by welfare funds meant to protect the vulnerable. And as the sun rose over Minnesota, the final political shield collapsed. At 7:14 a.m., FBI agents stormed the lakeside home of State Judge Qadra Yusuf Noor. The house, worth $2.5 million, had been purchased through a shell company registered as a homeless shelter nonprofit. They pulled her out as she scrambled to pack. No designer suit, no courtroom power, no smile for the cameras. She was handcuffed, and the indictment hit like thunder. 45 counts: fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, and facilitating narcotics trafficking. Dragged out in chains in front of stunned neighbors and stunned media, her public image collapsed in real time. "No comment," she muttered, but the evidence was already overwhelming. At the same time, across the city, the domino effect was unfolding. Operation Behind the Veil was now fully active. 29 locations were hit. 27 branch directors were arrested. $82 million in cash was seized in a single morning. One intercepted call sealed Noor's fate. Minutes before the raid, a senator's aide was recorded warning the handler, "Federal agents are tracking her. Delay them for us, but time is up." The shockwave reached Washington immediately. With the raid confirming what he had been warning about, President Trump did not wait. In a historic move, he signed an executive order terminating Somalia's temporary protected status, citing widespread abuse and criminal exploitation of refugee protections. By January 2026, the order was fully enforced. It froze the pipeline and triggered removals of more than 1,200 individuals linked to fraud networks. Trump stated plainly, "Those who come to hate America and steal from America will be sent home." But the collapse of this empire didn't only destroy careers. It shattered trust. Thousands of innocent immigrants, people who followed the law, suddenly saw their support system shaken because criminals had hijacked the process. Local residents felt betrayed, realizing their names and communities had been used as camouflage to siphon billions. The takedown of Noor's network exposed a $18 billion breach inside America's system. It proved that when compassion becomes blind, it becomes easy to exploit. It proved that political correctness, without accountability, can become the most expensive line item in the budget. As morning light hit the county offices now under federal control, the empire began to dissolve. The $18 billion machine Trump warned about, funneled through Suleiman's front organizations, was now being clawed back piece by piece. Agents seized $312 million in cash and assets. But the system was changing too. Welfare reform ignited across the state. Enhanced identity verification, AI-based claim auditing, and mandatory on-site inspections cut ghost enrollment by 72% in pilot testing. Somali refugees who fled war and persecution now faced a second trauma: betrayal. Mosque leaders condemned the collapse of trust, saying, "This stains all of us, but vigilance can rebuild what fraud destroyed." Whistleblowers began to surface. Community halls filled with residents demanding transparent aid. Legitimate providers began to thrive again, while fraud networks finally lost oxygen. Childcare waiting lists dropped 40%. Judge Noor now faced life in prison, but she was only one piece of the system. The software she used still exists. The ghost patient method is being sold on the dark web right now. Minneapolis is trying to heal. But here is the question you must ask yourself. If a state judge could run a criminal empire from inside her own district office for 4 years without anyone detecting it, who else is doing it right now? Because the pattern is repeating. We are currently investigating a similar network operating in Ohio. And if you want us to expose it next, hit like and subscribe. Truth is not hate speech, and justice is coming. And when the smoke cleared, Minneapolis was left staring at a truth that feels almost impossible to accept. This was never just a fraud case. This was never just paperwork. This was a weaponized system where compassion became camouflage and oversight became optional. Because the most terrifying part isn't that $18 billion could vanish. It's that it vanished quietly. With signatures, with stamps, with approved boxes checked inside offices that were built to protect the public. For years, taxpayers believed their money was helping struggling families, seniors, and real refugees trying to rebuild their lives. But behind that image, a criminal network allegedly turned aid programs into a pipeline, laundering public funds offshore, and feeding narcotics back into American streets. And when a judge, someone sworn to uphold the law, can allegedly sit at the center of it all, that's not just corruption. That is institutional collapse. Because when trust breaks, the damage spreads everywhere. To the elderly who rely on assistance, to the immigrant families who follow the rules, to the neighborhoods now forced to live under suspicion because criminals hijacked their identity as a shield. This case didn't just expose criminals, it exposed vulnerabilities. And if Minnesota can be breached this deeply, then no state is untouchable. So here's the question that must not be ignored. If this could happen right inside the system, without alarms, without intervention, how many more networks are still operating right now, unseen? If you believe accountability matters, comment justice. And if you want the next investigation, Ohio may be next. Hit like and subscribe because we're not done. Truth is not hate, truth is protection, and justice is coming.